Ladies and gentlemen, what a talk. We are dreaming, aren't we? I'm sure there are a lot of questions from the audience. Now, I would remind you, you can borrow pen or paper from our volunteers in the room at any time. If you wish to ask a question, you may also put your hand up during this Q&A session. You may choose to ask your question in Chinese or in English or in Tibetan language if you prefer. But please make sure your question is short and clear. Thank you. Any questions?
Hello, Khenpo. I have a question. If all phenomena originate from the mind, where do our standards for judging good and evil come from? Our desires also arise from the mind. If our moral standards come from the same source as our desires, which one should we trust? That's my question. Thank you.
We can look at this from the Yogacara school's perspective. It holds that all phenomena are created by the mind, accepting that within appearances there is both good and evil, but this good and evil is ultimately a phenomenon of the mind. The true nature is fundamentally pure, because every person, even the most wicked, still carries this fundamental nature. In the end, their wisdom and compassion will fully blossom. Therefore, the nature of the mind is not inherently evil. It is only temporarily obscured by various mental afflictions and defilements. Only by seeing the true nature of things can one attain liberation. So, the standard should be understood from the perspective of the mind's true nature versus its apparent manifestations. At its core, the mind is good, but in appearance it's like clouds covering the open sky.
Hello, Khenpo. I have a question. If matter and consciousness don't truly exist in the world, where does suffering and happiness come from? Aren't they also ultimately dependent on consciousness? Wouldn't that make suffering and happiness meaningless?
We'll take happiness and suffering. When we dream, they arise from the mind within the dream, and in dreams there is both happiness and suffering. The scriptures teach that there is a fundamental consciousness known as the alaya vijnana, storehouse consciousness, and within it there are both virtuous and non-virtuous karmas. Negative karma leads to suffering, while wholesome karma gives rise to happiness.
I think from a physics standpoint, you've been analyzing human experience in the material world since you mentioned particles. That clearly falls within physics. My question is, how do you view this from a biological perspective? It seems, in your view, the relationship between humans and the material world isn't very clear. From biology's perspective, humans and the material world are inseparably connected. Throughout our evolution, we've had to rely on the physical world to survive. So isn't our attachment to material things actually quite important?
Actually, I wasn't only drawing from physics just now, because in the end I also referenced Robert's perspective, and he is a biologist, so I used his point of view. I've found that for people like you, a biological perspective may be easier for people like you to understand. So the book I cited, which you may already know, is Biocentrism. Physics, as most people know, looks at things through atoms and nuclei, while biology also studies living systems beyond purely physical structures. It also covers life, cells, bacteria, questions related to awareness and consciousness in living beings. Now, biology really needs to go further, and from what I hear, it's the same abroad. In many places it just keeps analysing cells and external physiological structures. Biology really should be engaging with the structure of the mind and the relationship between the mind and the body, including biological cells themselves and the nuclei inside them. There's so much to explore within the cell nucleus. The possible relationship between consciousness and DNA has not yet been fully explored. That's why I cited the biologist's view to explain this. That's the reason. If you're interested, I think in the future we could approach Buddhism's teachings from a biological angle, and that might actually be even more illuminating. What I mean is, we have instincts. For example, in ancient times, people gathered food together to survive. That was a vital instinct. Without it, we simply couldn't have survived.
So our engagement with material necessities is important for survival. That's why we're so drawn to the material world. And I think its importance goes well beyond that. Frankly speaking, we do need material things.
Some people think Buddhism is a philosophy of nothingness, that it teaches there is nothing at all. Others see it as mysticism, something very esoteric. And some think Buddhism is about withdrawing from the world, escaping from ordinary life. None of these are quite right. From my understanding, Buddhism is actually quite engaged with the world, whether you approach it through biology or physics or human ethics, and perhaps most importantly in the area of ethics, Buddhism can continue to engage with the changing world. Everything new that emerges in the world, Buddhism can speak to. But the way it speaks to these things within the broad framework of its teachings has never fundamentally changed. So nowadays, I'm not sure how it is here, but many people are constantly chasing after the next new thing. Take the iPhone, for example. iPhone 4, iPhone 5, iPhone 6. People keep chasing each new model. Honestly, that kind of chasing is exhausting. And after all of it, how many iPhones do you actually end up with? After all these Apples are gone, what do we really have left? That's what I keep thinking about.
Khenpo, hello. There's a question from an audience member written on a slip of paper. It says, beings in the 6 realms continually create karma. So what exactly is karma? Is it a kind of energy?
Yes, karma can be seen as a powerful causal energy.
Hello, Khenpo-ji. My question is, humans have a human lifespan. Devas have a deva lifespan. And the scriptures also say Buddhas have a Buddha lifespan. So my question is, where does a Buddha go after entering parinirvana? Thank you.
She said Khenpo-ji, right? I also like single-syllable names. People who aren't familiar with my name often mispronounce it. Some say Jidasuo, others say, about the question you just asked, humans have a human lifespan, devas have a deva lifespan, all beings in the 6 realms have different lifespans. Ordinary beings are bound by this limitation. That's simply how it is. When beings in the 6 realms die, they are reborn in other realms according to their karma, but the Buddha is not bound by karma. After manifesting parinirvana, one can say he had already attained the highest state. There is a sutra called the White Lotus Sutra, which says the Buddha is never extinguished and the Dharma remains in the world forever. What this means is the Buddha's true nature of wisdom is never extinguished. So from a Buddhist perspective, the Buddha doesn't truly enter parinirvana. And thank you for giving me a 1-syllable name. You're Bhutanese, right?
Rinpoche, I'm actually from Bhutan. Yesterday I asked a question about whether life is like a dream. Rinpoche, I'd like to ask, if consciousness and matter are fundamentally opposed, what would consciousness be like without matter? Let me put forward a hypothesis. Rinpoche, if our consciousness were to leave the body, what would that disembodied consciousness be like?
A mind without a body is like the mind in the bardo, the intermediate state. A mind without matter is like the mind of beings in the formless realm.
I'd like to follow up on something you just said. You said we are living in a dream right now, and we aren't even aware of it. This idea has actually been around for a long time. Zhuangzi was perhaps the first to articulate it. He told the story of the butterfly dream. The protagonist couldn't tell if he was a man dreaming he was a butterfly or a butterfly dreaming he was a man. But if this is true, if reality is just a dream, it creates a lot of confusion. Because in a dream, only consciousness is active. So where does responsibility in reality lie? Who is accountable for what we do? If we don't even know we're dreaming, if we're unaware of what we're doing, and karma is created in that state, who bears responsibility for it? Because we're completely unaware, we can't really be held accountable for what we do in the dream. But then who should be? Is my question clear? That's what I'm asking.
Well, this is actually something the great master Chandrakirti addressed. He said, when we are dreaming, the dreamer, the dream itself, and the objects experienced in the dream, all 3 appear to exist. But when you wake up, you realize that none of those 3 actually existed. In the same way, here, in what we call reality, We are like dreamers. The person, the circumstances, and the actions, these three do genuinely seem to exist before we attain enlightenment. But once we fully awaken, you are no longer controlled by external phenomena. At that point, you've completely transcended the ordinary world. And this is confirmed by the accounts of many great realized practitioners throughout history who have attained such realization.
Thank you so much for coming to speak with us. I'm deeply grateful. If I may, I have 2 questions. Both are short. The first is about something you mentioned at the end of your talk, about not looking outward, but turning inward. That's the path to awakening. Very helpful. Are there any practical daily methods or suggestions that can help us look inward more effectively and ultimately guide us toward realization? My second question is about karma. Many people find this concept puzzling. As far as I know, there are several explanations of karma and different types. As someone who trusts in logic and science, karma that's created and ripens within this same lifetime is relatively easy to understand, but others say that whatever you do in this life will affect your next life. From a logical and scientific standpoint, that's hard to accept. What do you think?
Here's how I see it. First, understanding the material world is genuinely important, but the material world alone isn't enough. Our inner life matters even more, because even the wealthiest people in the world are often deeply unhappy inside. I often see people driving BMWs and Mercedes, living in villas, and yet their eyes are filled with tears. Their hearts aren't at peace. That's why I really hope that people would study a text in Buddhism called The Way of the Bodhisattva. The Way of the Bodhisattva truly helps us grow as human beings, nurturing altruism and a deeper sense of well-being. It's incredibly valuable. What I especially want to offer everyone is the opportunity to study this text. Many people have seen real transformation in their lives through it. It is truly the greatest treasure of the inner world. As for your second question, karma isn't something we can fully grasp through logical reasoning alone. Our teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha, also said in the sutras that ordinary beings can rarely know which karma will ripen in this life and which in future lives. That's extremely difficult to determine. Even arhats and bodhisattvas can only perceive certain aspects of karma. The subtler details are hard even for them to know. That said, there are certain specific karmas in this life that are explained quite clearly in the scriptures. For example, killing one's parents or killing monastics. Some of those karmas ripen in this very life. Others ripen in future lives. This is recorded in certain scriptures. So it really requires systematic study to truly understand how karma works.
First, thank you so much for your wonderful teaching, Khenpo. You also spoke about the relationship between Buddhism and science. I'd like to ask, over 2,000 to 3,000 years of development, Buddhism has in some ways gone beyond what science can reach. And yet many people are trying to use science to validate Buddhist ideas. Are these two approaches contradictory? And second, from a Buddhist perspective, can the true existence of things always be proven? Thank you.
The true existence of what, exactly?
From a Buddhist point of view, can the true existence of anything be proven?
For the first question, some people have strong faith in science, but don't fully understand many of the teachings in Buddhism. For those people, we can use truths that both Buddhism and science agree on. Explaining things through scientific reasoning can make them more accessible and convincing. The same works the other way. Some people don't know much about science, but through a Buddhist teaching, they might develop interest in science or find support for their understanding. There's nothing wrong with that. We see this in certain religious communities today. As for the second question, if something truly exists in the world and it can be proven, then we can say it's real. But some things that genuinely exist can't necessarily be proven. It depends on what tools you use and what methods you rely on. It's very much tied to the methods available for verification.
Thank you so much, Khenpo Sodargye, for traveling so far to speak with us. And thank you to the moderator for this opportunity. My question is about life release. I know Khenpo Sodargye is a strong advocate for the practice of life release, and in your writings you mentioned that it benefits the mind and can even help with illness. There are many benefits, but we also know that in China, a common situation arises. For example, when people release fish, many people are releasing on one side, while downstream, others are waiting with nets and fishing rods to catch them. How do you see this? It seems like one person's good intention ends up stirring up bad intentions in others. Please share your thoughts. Thank you.
In China, there are many who practice life release, and many who do so in a proper, meaningful way. I think life release is very important. It's a kind of inner beauty. Through it, we protect our shared home, and it reflects a kind of beauty in how we care for the environment. It also expresses beauty in our actions. Life release is one way to embody that. Whatever good we do, we shouldn't give it up just because there are difficulties or imperfections in how it's carried out. If some of the released animals are caught by others, we can find smarter ways to handle it. There are also locations where it's difficult to catch them or where they're safe from interference. We can choose good environments and plan wisely in advance. Here in Australia, for example, I was curious about this and asked around. People told me there are many bird species here as well as marine life, and life release is practiced as well. But when they do it, they use good judgment, checking which animals can survive in that environment and which can't. This kind of practice truly expresses human compassion, and that matters deeply. Let's take one last question. I noticed a few Tibetans with their hands up. Shall we give the last question to them?
For the final question, I'd like to say Tashi Delek to Khenpo Sodargye. I have a short question. What exactly does the material world refer to, and how does Buddhism explain it?
She says her question is simple. From a Buddhist point of view, what do we mean when we talk about the material world? What kinds of phenomena does it include? Here's my answer. What we've been discussing today as the material world is being explained from a Buddhist perspective. It refers to everything apart from the mind, from the macro scale of the vast universe and celestial bodies, down to the micro scale of microorganisms and everything above the molecular level, all of these subtle dimensions of the outer world. In today's discussion, I didn't actually walk through the macro world. I focused my analysis on the micro level. So from the standpoint of the material world as a whole, what we call the material world is essentially the domain of objects perceived by consciousness. That's why today I used fairly simple language to explain this to everyone. Thank you all.
Thank you, Khenpo. I'm sure all of us have learned so much from your enlightenment tonight. Now, once again, I would like to invite everybody to stand up and pay respect to the departure of our Rinpoche tonight. Thank you.